I didn't plan to run into my ex at Pride. I planned sunscreen, water, and a route to the shade. I packed a small flag and permission to breathe again. Instead, one familiar laugh cut through the music, and the past stepped beside me in a red bandana. All at once, June felt like January, and my heart forgot the memo about moving on. If you've ever loved once and wondered, this is how I learned to love again. Tonight. Stay with me, hit subscribe, and share this story if second chances warm your heart as much as mine today. I was standing on a curb in Chicago, somewhere between the smell of street pretzels and sunscreen and the brassy echo of a marching band when I heard that laugh. It was a clean, ringing note, the kind that travels above sirens and bass lines and chatter because it used to live inside my chest. I knew it before I could place it, like knowing your own name. It flipped something old and careful inside me. It cut through the noise, and suddenly I was 26 again. And the city was a map of the places we learned to love each other. I turned, and there he was. Daniel, red bandana around his curls, black sunglasses pushed up, wearing a white tank that made it look like summer had a favorite. He looked like a photograph someone had held in their wallet for years and taken out to show me right then. The corners were softer, the smile deeper. He saw me before he recognized me. You can always watch that moment happen in someone's eyes. Surprise, then warmth, then the quick calculation of what to say after so much time has passed and so much hasn't. My friend Rena was talking about where to meet later for snacks, her hand steady on my forearm because she knows crowds make me careful. I squeezed her fingers and she followed my gaze like only a real friend does. No words, just a look that asked, "Do you need to go?" I nodded. She kissed my cheek and told me to text, even if it was just an emoji of a pretzel if that's all I could manage. Her kindness was a soft landing in the high noise of the day. Daniel waved. Not a tiny, timid wave, but a full, palm-up hello, big enough to reach across whatever we had built to keep ourselves safe. He stepped toward me through a constellation of strangers in rainbow capes and glitter and comfortable shoes. I saw he still walked with that slight bounce, the one that happened when he wanted to run but was staying, when he was too happy to stand still or too nervous not to move. It was June, so the sun gave us both this kind of blessing glow, even though the morning was barely out of its coffee. "Hey," he said, like we'd been neighbors. Like I'd been out of town and just got back. I felt it all at once. 3 years of silence, 6 years of knowing each other, 1,000 ordinary mornings where we learned each other's coffee orders and the exact sound of each other's good night. We laughed, me awkward, him bright, and somewhere a whistle blew confetti into the air like the sky forgot how to be plain. "Hey," I answered, my voice coming from somewhere deeper than it usually does when I'm worried. I felt the careful part of me scanning. What do I say? Who are we now? There was a time for us when I didn't ask those questions because the answers were easy. Then life made them hard, and I left to make them easier or at least quieter. Life is funny that way. If we're lucky, it lets us try again. "I like your flag," he said, nodding at the tiny rainbow I'd clipped to my bag. His voice had the same shape, but somehow a calmer weather to it. I thanked him and told him I liked his bandana, which felt like a small step toward something like normal. The parade crescendoed past us, balloons bobbing like bright punctuation. A group of elders in matching t-shirts rolled by on scooters, waving like queens, and I felt that ache of respect and gratitude we all feel at Pride when we see people who survived the parts of the story that tried to erase them. A woman with silver hair blew a kiss and shouted, "Happy Pride, babies!" And her voice made something in me settle. Daniel saw it too. He lived inside that exact kind of softness, and watching him look at her, I could tell he felt the same blessing I did. The day was wide. Anything could happen. Even a conversation we both ran from when we were younger. "You look good," he said, and the way he said it wasn't a test. It wasn't tied to any desperate memory or accusation. It was the way you say it when you mean it, and it costs you nothing because you've already paid all your old bills. I smiled, said he did too. He really did. He looked like someone who had learned to sleep, to drink water, to forgive himself when dinner was cereal and when being bright took too much practice. I gestured to the patch of shade we'd been eyeing, under a young tree playing its part bravely in the heat. He followed me there, and the shift into that cooler light felt like finding a bench on a long walk. People moved like river water around us, carrying their songs and their stories, and we let them. We just watched and breathed and let our shoulders drop. "How long has it been?" he asked, not unkind. 3 years since we talked," I said, then swallowed. 6 years since we met. My math shook at the edges. He nodded. "You do that when the numbers sit heavy." He took off his sunglasses, and there were his eyes, the same shape as always, the same way one brow lifted a little higher when he was trying to hear every part of you at once. "I'm sorry," he said. And the words were simple, but they were a bridge. Not a big speech, not an apology that carried a grocery list of what was wrong with me and him and our timing and the universe.
Just, I'm sorry.
I told him I was sorry, too, because I was. Back then, I had been so good at setting fires, so I didn't have to admit I was cold. He had his own matches. Sometimes two good people can be bad at being together if they're both trying to be the sky and never learned how to be the rain. We watched a float go by with a big cardboard, coffee cup on top, and dancers handing out coupons for cold brew. It tugged at a memory, and we both laughed at the same time. "Our first date," he said. "The coffee shop in Lincoln Square," I added. "The place with the uneven floor that made the high-top table wobble." I had worn a blue shirt I thought made my eyes look kind, and he had worn a sweater even though it was warm because he was always a little cold in air conditioning. I told him I liked his laugh, and he said he liked my kindness like it was a thing he could see. We talked about the movies that made us cry and how we both cried when we watched veterans hugging their partners in airports. We told the truth like it wasn't a dangerous thing. We went on a second date the next day and a third the day after that, because in the beginning we didn't know how to save anything for later. In the middle, he said now, almost chuckling, we forgot how to talk. It was a fact, no blame. He had started drinking more wine than he admitted to when he told his friends he was fine. I had started working later, and then not coming home because home felt like a mirror I wasn't brave enough to look into. My mother got sick, and I left to take care of her because that's what you do when you're the only child. And the house you grew up in remembers you better than you remember yourself. He should have come with me, I thought then, like love is a suitcase you pack for two no matter what else is already in the trunk. But grief is a language, and we weren't fluent yet. We didn't understand that some days you need the long, dark coffee, and some days you need the walk and the silence, and some days you need someone to hold the list while you buy groceries because the list is heavy. We were trying, but, as much as it hurts to admit, we were not good at trying together. "I went to meetings," he said, voice steady like a story he's told out loud enough times that it belongs to him, not to the shame. "It's been 2 years. His eyes held mine, not proud in a showy way, but proud like I hope you see I'm still here. I told him I was glad. I told him I believed him. I told him I was sorry I didn't know how to be there for him without swallowing myself whole. I told him I'd learned that watching someone heal doesn't mean becoming their nurse. It means being a hand at the small of their back when the steps feel tall. He nodded, and we let the truth sit with us like shade. "I started going to therapy," I added. "For me, for real." He smiled. We both knew the version where I had gone before, but kept telling the counselor what I thought they wanted to hear. Because I didn't want to unbox the expensive set of sadness that ran in my family like the chin, like the laugh. I told him I learned to say I don't know and I'm afraid and please wait for me without turning those words into accusations. He told me he learned to say, I am enough and I am sorry, and today is a day I can enjoy without earning it by suffering first. We laughed at how hard that sentence is to say, even on a good day. A father with a stroller went by, pushing with one hand and carrying a rainbow umbrella with the other. The baby locked eyes with me like babies do, with that total, unguarded gaze that makes you feel known all the way down to the days you carried your own lunch to school. Daniel waved at the baby, and the baby squealed. I felt a small tug in my chest, the one that always shows up when I imagine a life where love lasts and ordinary things line up like pearls on a string. Groceries, doctor appointments, movie nights where nobody talks during the good part, mornings where the coffee is lukewarm, but the thank you is warm enough to make it better. You look happy, I said, meaning it. Like you know where your chair is in the room, he laughed. I have better chairs now. He told me about his apartment, the plants he had learned not to overwater, the neighbor who leaves baked bread at everyone's door when her arthritis is kind, the way he's learned to read recipes all the way through before turning on the oven. He told me how he volunteers at the LGBTQ Center on Thursdays, greeting people with a clipboard and a smile, making sure nobody stands alone unless they ask to. He told me his job lets him leave at 5 now and he doesn't bring his laptop to bed anymore because that was maybe his first bad marriage. I told him about the job I found that lets me sleep, the nurse who taught me how to say goodbye to my mom without apologizing for all the ways we didn't have enough time. I told him about walking every morning, about the elderly man on my block who nods at me like we're both in on some small, good secret, the way the city is quieter before the day remembers its name. Pride moved around us and the day warmed. It was one of those Midwestern summer days where you can see the heat if you look right, shimmering above the asphalt like a second sky. Rena texted me 3 pretzel emojis and I sent back a heart. Daniel saw the notification and smiled without asking. He was always good about not reading my texts over my shoulder. Some small, stubborn piece of trust, still there, like a penny you keep finding under the rug. I swallowed a long drink of water and he did too, and our elbows bumped, a tiny touch, but enough to remind me that my skin remembered him. Do you want to walk with me? He asked. Not, do you want to get back together? Not, can we pretend we never hurt each other? Just, do you want to walk? The miracle of that simple invitation, the kindness of a short horizon. I said yes. We fell into step without thinking. Some part of people remembers the cadence of a person they loved. Our feet figured it out before our brains made rules. We walked past teenagers in homemade shirts, past a church group offering bottled water with signs that said, "We're glad you're here." And we believed them because they were kind without pushing, because they asked, "Are you staying cool?" instead of "Are you saved?" We walked past a group of veterans in parade hats and sunglasses, one of them balancing his dog's paws in his hands so the little white feet didn't get too hot on the pavement. We thanked them and the man with the dog said, "We're just happy to see the world we fought for look more like this." I thought about the worlds we fight for in our living rooms, the ones we build and burn and build again with the same 2 pairs of hands, held or not held. When the parade turned the corner and the street breathed a little, we found a quieter block. The noise softened to a hum. A man in a lawn chair nodded at us like we were neighbors on a Sunday, and I nodded back. We slowed. There was a little cafe with a chalkboard sign that said, "Try our lemonade, it's like a hug for your mouth." And we took the suggestion because life is too short to ignore that kind of hope. We sat side by side on a bench in the shade, and the first sip was so cold it made my shoulders drop another inch. Daniel sighed the way you sigh when something small manages to be exactly right. "What did you think when you saw me?" he asked, his voice careful like bubble wrap around a fragile thing. I thought, "Oh," I said. "Like finding a letter in your own handwriting that you forgot you mailed yourself?" He smiled. I thought, "Thank you," he said, even before I knew who I was thanking. He looked at me, and in that look I felt the space we had both earned by doing the work alone. The bridge wasn't built on fantasy. It was built on meetings and therapy and mornings where I didn't want to get out of bed but did anyway, and nights where he didn't reach for a glass but reached for a book. We had failed each other once, but we hadn't failed ourselves for good. He asked about my mother, and I told him the truth. I told him how grief feels like remembering a phone number you can't call. I told him I keep her ring on a chain and I touch it when I'm nervous. And today it felt warm from the sun and from my skin, and from the way the day kept introducing us to strangers who felt like cousins. He told me about his dad, who still called him every Sunday to ask if he was eating vegetables, who had learned to ask about Daniel's boyfriend even when the boyfriend was nobody, because learning how to be a father is also a kind of second chance. "Do you think we could ever—" he started, then stopped. The lemonade had made its own small weather on the glass, tiny beads of water like a map someone forgot to label. I watched one drop gather courage and fall. He looked at me again. "Do you ever think about us?" "Yes," I said before the fear could make me say something polite. I told him I worried that saying yes would open a door to the same house with the same draft. I told him I was afraid I would fall back into old patterns. The way I cracked jokes when things were serious. The way I cleaned the kitchen like it could fix an argument. He told me he worried about becoming the man he was near the end. The one with excuses lined up like shoes. The one whose apologies were IOUs he never paid. We put our I'm scareds on the bench between us like lunchboxes. It's funny how much less heavy things are when you don't have to carry them alone. He asked if I ever remembered the night of the blackout, when the whole block lost power and we ate cold noodles out of the pot because the stove wouldn't light and we had promised ourselves not to open the fridge. We sat on the floor by the window and the city glowed from candles and headlights and the neon that didn't need permission. We told stories about our childhoods, and he cried when he talked about the first time he knew he was different, standing in a Little League uniform that never felt like his. I cried about being asked when I would settle down, the kind of question that assumes love and marriage are a grocery aisle with the bread right there on the end cap. We held each other's hands and didn't make it a big deal. He asked me if I remembered. I said I did. And I remembered how in the dark, we had felt brave because we couldn't see our reflections. Maybe that was the clue. Maybe bravery is easier when you stop trying to judge your face. We finished our lemonade and kept walking. The day softened into afternoon. Pride does this thing where the crowds don't get smaller. They just get gentler at the edges, like the day is an old friend who knows when to bring the conversation down to a murmur so the good parts can land. A drag queen in a bright yellow dress stopped us and handed us sunscreen, dotting a little on my nose with a flourish that made me laugh out loud. She told Daniel to keep that smile, or she'd come find him and remind him why. We promised we would. We tipped her because kindness deserves cash as well as applause. "Can I ask you something?" he said, as we watched a teenage boy teach his grandfather how to hold a small flag so it caught the breeze just right. I nodded. He asked, "What do you want your days to feel like now?" Not what do you want to do, not what job or what neighborhood or what vacation. What do you want your days to feel like? I thought about it. I told him I want my days to feel like clean sheets and a full fruit bowl and the sound of somebody laughing in the next room. I want mornings to feel like a quiet congratulations for making it through another night. I want nights to feel like permission. Permission to read, to be silent, to be tired without being in trouble. He listened with that raised eyebrow and nodded like he was keeping it, like he was tucking my answers into a pocket he would check later. Then he told me his. He wants to feel useful but not used. He wants to be surprised often and not scared as much. He wants to eat dinner at a table more nights than not. He wants to remember to keep the good napkin in the drawer for any Tuesday. We drifted back toward the park, where families and friends had spread blankets and started claiming small squares of shade like pioneer homesteaders. We found a spot on the grass under a tree that surely wished it had grown faster. I texted Rena that I was okay, and she sent me a picture of a pretzel the size of a steering wheel and 2 thumbs-up emojis. I sent her a picture of my shoes next to Daniel's, and she sent 3 exclamation points and a heart, because she knows how to be excited with you without making any promises you haven't said out loud. We sat with our shoes off, and the grass felt like a kind of medicine. Daniel's voice softened as the world turned down its volume a notch. He told me the story of the first time he went to a meeting and how the room was colder than it needed to be, and how a man pressed a cup of coffee into his hands and told him it might help, even if it didn't. He told me about the tiny collection of chips in his pocket now, and how sometimes he taps them like a rosary when the day is long. I told him about the first time I told my counselor that I was angry at my mom for leaving me, even though she didn't, even though she died, and my counselor didn't correct me or make me feel foolish. She just nodded and held a tissue box like a life jacket and let me say I miss you into the empty air like it might call my mother back. We watched an older couple walk by holding hands, both of them wearing matching sun hats and those long-sleeve shirts fishermen wear so they don't burn. One of them had a homemade button that said I survived the 80s and learned to love every minute of these. I felt a pang, the kind that is both gratitude and grief. Daniel squeezed my hand. We hadn't touched like that yet. The squeeze was simple, full of context, free of demand. I squeezed back. It was the kind of touch that says, I am here and I am listening, and I remember you even when I don't need anything from you. As the afternoon tipped toward evening, The sky did that generous summer thing where it swears it will stay bright forever, and for a moment you believe it. The Parks Department had set up misting stations, and kids ran through them shrieking, their joy an announcement that the world still had room for simple miracles. The brass band came back around, warming up the air with a familiar tune. Daniel and I stood and danced in the way you do when you know you won't win a trophy for it, but you also know the prize is the moment itself. We laughed at ourselves because our knees are older now, because our rhythm is more about the smile than the shoulder, and the teenagers around us were happy to let us have our corner of joy. A woman with a rainbow cape swooped past and told us we were cute, and we both tilted our heads and said thank you, like we were receiving a medal. When the sun finally decided to begin its true descent, the gold hour blessed everything with a forgiveness filter. We wandered toward the river, following the small migrations of people, all heading toward something that smelled like food and sounded like an acoustic guitar. We ended up at the railing, watching the water move like a muscle, steady and strong. It was quieter there. We leaned our arms on the cool metal, and for a while we didn't talk. And it wasn't heavy. It was the silence of two radios tuned to the same station. The guitars strummed somewhere behind us. Someone laughed. The city breathed. "Can we start with coffee?" he said, like two adults who know what we're doing and also like two kids who don't. It was the best question. It walked right down the middle of hope and wisdom, and it didn't apologize for either. I nodded. We picked a cafe we both knew, with stable tables now, and agreed on Tuesday, because it felt close enough to mean something, far enough to give us both time to think and not panic. Then he did something I will remember when I'm 80 and the world is a future I can't imagine. He asked, "Is it okay if I hug you?" The question was a gift. It made my yes worth something. I said yes, and then we hugged. Not a tight, dramatic hug you give at airports when the movie is about to end, but the kind of hug you give when you want another one later. It smelled like sunscreen and lemon and his skin. It felt like a knot gently learning it could let go. We walked back toward the street to say goodbye, and his hand brushed mine. The city lights were coming on one by one, the way hope arrives in manageable pieces. He looked at me like a man standing in a doorway, like he was holding it open so the breeze could find its way through both rooms. "I'm going to go," he said, and I heard the rest of the sentence, which was, "I'm going to keep my promise to myself to leave before I make this too heavy." I loved him a little for that. I loved me a little for letting him. We said goodnight. I watched him go not because I was afraid he would disappear, but because sometimes watching someone walk away is a way of honoring that they will come back. Tuesday came like most Tuesdays. Mail, dishes, hope. I wore a soft shirt because I wanted to be soft. I got there early and picked the table in the corner where the light made everything look a little kinder. He arrived with the red bandana tied around his wrist like a small flag only we needed to see. We ordered our coffee, read the menu all the way through, laughed when he still almost opened the fridge in his stories, even though he knew better now. We asked questions that didn't trap each other. We listened to the answers like they were instructions to build a bookshelf that would hold actual weight. We didn't pretend we were brand new. We didn't pretend we were finishing an interrupted sentence. We started a new paragraph in familiar handwriting. We talked about boundaries like they were fences you paint together, so you both know what color they are. We agreed to tell each other when we were tired and to make space for that without turning it into a test. We asked for what we needed with the courage that comes from learning you can do hard things, and also with the tenderness of people who have seen how not asking costs more. We started slow. We took walks, and sometimes we held hands, and sometimes we didn't. We met each other's friends in places with comfortable chairs. Rena approved, which was a tiny miracle and also not a surprise because she roots for people the way gardeners do. We made dinners that were ordinary. Tuesdays turned into Thursdays and then into Saturdays that didn't need plans to be valuable. We learned to say I'm sorry before the dishes piled up. We learned to laugh when we caught ourselves doing the exact thing that used to make us stuck, and then we did a new thing. We learned to leave when the party got loud and to stay when it was just our fear making the noise. We went to the LGBTQ center together a few times. He took me on his Thursday, and I watched him greet people with their names like he was handing them back their own door keys. I saw his kindness in public, the kind that I had known in private, and it moved me the way good music does. He watched me teach a budgeting class on a Saturday and told me afterward that the way I talk about money makes people feel less alone. We were proud of each other without turning it into a scoreboard. We had hard days. Of course we did. I had a week where every little thing felt like a big thing, and a small comment made me want to stump my toe on purpose just to have a pain I could understand. He had a craving one night so loud it sounded like a siren. We called our people. We made tea. We sat in the same room and played a board game where the pieces looked like tiny cities. We said what was true. We went to bed with nothing solved and woke up with nothing broken we couldn't carry. Months passed the way months do, with rent and birthdays and laundry and news cycles that made us shake our heads and hold each other's hands at the bus stop. Autumn leaned in and put her hand on the city's shoulder. We bought apples and went home and ate them sliced with a little salt because his grandmother taught him that, and it tasted like some new kind of memory. We started lighting a candle at dinner, not for romance, but because it made us pause before we ate and say thank you to the day, to the farmers, to ourselves for making it all the way here. One night, I got a letter from an old friend who had not been kind to me back then because he was not kind to himself. He apologized in that way people do when they finally caught up to their better nature. I cried reading it, not because I needed it to be okay, but because it felt like the universe was tidying up. Daniel held me and told me the letter mattered even if I didn't need it. I held him when he came home from a meeting and said he had told his story to a kid who looked exactly like him at 25, and he had felt both sad and grateful for the symmetry. When June came back again, we stood at the curb together. This time we had planned for it. Sunscreen, water, shade. Hats that made us look like we belonged to the same expedition. The elders rolled by on their scooters again. The veterans waved. The teenagers shouted the names of the songs that had saved them. The city lifted itself up and danced. A woman with silver hair blew a kiss and shouted, "Happy Pride, babies!" And we blew a kiss back, both of us. We watched a man teach his father how to hold the flag so it caught the breeze. We watched the sunlight run its finger down the river. We stood close without needing to hold on like the ground was shaky. I thought about last year and the laugh that found me in the crowd. I thought about the lemonade, the bench, the quiet under the tree. I thought about all the ordinary days that made the big days lighter. I thought about my mom and his dad and the men who wore buttons that turned history into a sentence you could wear on your chest and carry without breaking. I thought about the kindness of a second chance that doesn't pretend to erase the first ending. I thought about how sometimes love is not two people deciding to be perfect. It's two people deciding to be brave at the same time. He touched my shoulder and pointed to a float we recognized, the coffee cup, rebranded, the wobble fixed, and we laughed. He breathed in like the day smelled exactly right. I took his hand in a way that said I know, and he squeezed back in a way that said me too. The band played, the people cheered, and somewhere in the crowd a grandmother clapped the beat and laughed like she'd been waiting for this all along. We stood there, two men in a city that had loved us and ignored us and then loved us again, and we felt the kind of peace that rarely arrives with confetti. It's the kind you tend like a plant. It's the kind you water on Thursdays. It's the kind you check on when the window is open and the night air smells like rain. If you had told me a few years ago that I would run into my ex at Pride and that it would be a doorway instead of a cliff, I would have smiled politely and changed the subject. Back then, I thought second chances were just reruns. Now I know they can be new episodes with familiar actors, better writing, stronger boundaries, more laughter, and commercial breaks where you get up to refill your water and kiss someone's temple for no reason at all. Now I know that sometimes the city waits a year to hand you exactly the conversation you needed and the quiet bench you didn't know to ask for. Now I know that people can change, and the best proof is not the speeches they give, but the dishes they wash, and the meetings they attend, and the apologies they say without a courtroom in their eyes. Evening settled like a soft blanket. We walked home together, and we didn't rush. We stopped for ice cream a few blocks from his apartment because it's never too late in the day for vanilla with sprinkles. The teenager behind the counter asked if we were celebrating anything, and we said yes today, which made her smile like she'd been given permission to believe in something gentle. The city hummed, the train eased by, and a dog barked like a doorbell. We ate our ice cream and talked about the tomatoes on his windowsill and the book I was reading and whether we needed more basil seeds. We made a plan to call our parents in the morning, not to make any declarations, but just to hear their voices and say we're eating vegetables and we have new chairs. When we reached his building, he took my hand and asked, "Walk me to my door?" I did. Good love is a series of small yeses. At the threshold, we paused. The world does that for us sometimes, gives us a pause without us having to ask. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and the words weren't necessary. We had already said all the ones that mattered. We kissed. A soft, careful kiss. The kind that doesn't demand the next thing. The kind that knows the value of a thing is not how fast you get it, but how it changes you when you do. When we parted, he smiled like someone who had remembered what he wanted to feel like, and I felt the exact same. That night, home in my own bed, I lay there and listened to the quiet. The city still moved outside, a gentle proof that life goes on even when we are still. I reached for my mother's ring and held it. I said thank you to the ceiling, to the day, to the boy I used to be and the man I am now, to the man who is walking beside me. I closed my eyes with a gratitude that wasn't a performance. It was just the truth. Love is better the second time when the first time taught you how to listen. Pride is sweeter when you have some to share. If you're listening to this and wondering about your own second chance, I hope you don't hear a promise you can buy in a store. I hope you hear permission. Permission to try. Permission to say, I don't know. Permission to hold someone's hand at a parade and feel like a whole story fits into that one small gesture. The truth is, sometimes the past will call out to you with a familiar laugh in the middle of a loud day. If and when it does, I hope the part of you that has been practicing kindness will answer. I hope your day will open a little wider. I hope you'll get lemonade. I hope you'll find shade. I hope you'll listen. I hope you'll forgive. I hope you'll be brave enough to be ordinary and wise enough to know that's where love hides. We went to Pride the next year, too. We had bigger hats. We knew where the good pretzels were. We found the elders and waved like we were sending our thanks on a breeze. We knew the cross streets where the noise is kinder and the corner where the drag queen with the sunscreen holds court. We wore comfortable shoes. We took pictures and then put our phones away. We danced our funny uncle dance. We took a slow lap around the lake and stopped to watch a kid teach his grandmother to take a selfie without closing one eye. We came home and made grilled cheese and ate it at the table with the candle lit. We looked at each other like people who had stopped believing love is a verdict and started believing it's a practice. Late that night, before we went to sleep, we stood by the window and watched the last of the fireworks bloom above the city. Each one grew and vanished, and the dark was never empty because it was full of what had just been. We held hands and said nothing and listened to the quiet that follows celebration, and it sounded like something we could live inside for a long time. When we finally said goodnight, it was to the day and to the boy I once was and to the man beside me and to all the strangers who had danced near us with their own stories and their own second chances. Running into my ex at Pride didn't fix everything. It didn't turn life into a montage. It didn't erase the work either of us had to do and still has to do tomorrow and next week and a year from now. But it did open a door and we walked through it, one careful step at a time, carrying our lemonade and our sunscreen and the names of the people who taught us how to be kind. And once we were on the other side, we found a little bench in the shade where we could rest together. That, more than anything, is what a second chance feels like. It feels like shade. It feels like water. It feels like hearing a familiar laugh and knowing that this time, if you follow it, you'll find your way home.